The morning after my father's funeral, I woke to the sound of a key scraping in the front door lock. Except it wasn't my key. I was still in my funeral clothes, the black dress a crumbled mess on the floor. The house was silent, the kind of heavy quiet that only exists after a coffin has been lowered into the ground. I walked downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and found her standing there, my stepmom. She had a new lock in her hand and the old one was already on the floor. Her expression wasn't grief-stricken. It was cold, calculated, final. She looked at me and her voice was flat. "The house isn't yours anymore." I saw them then through the glass panels of the door. 2 black trash bags on the manicured lawn. All my things. My books, my laptop, the photo of me and Dad from our last fishing trip. She had packed my life into garbage bags while I slept. The finality in her eyes was absolute. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in grief. This was a blueprint, and she had just executed the first phase. A week later, the official will arrived. It was a corporate document, sterile and precise. The language was nothing like my father. He was a man who spoke in stories, in warmth. This document spoke in clauses and subclauses. It left everything to my stepmom, with a small, tightly controlled trust established for her 2 biological children from a previous marriage. I was mentioned in a single dismissive line, a one-time payment of $10,000, described as a gesture of goodwill. As I read it, a cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't my father's voice. This was her lawyer's fingerprint. I remembered my dad mentioning him once, a slick corporate type he never quite trusted. The document was a masterpiece of legal exclusion, but the first crack appeared in a clause about marital assets. It listed the house as jointly acquired property. But I knew. I was 12 when my dad bought that house, years before he ever met her. The dates didn't align. The foundation of her claim was built on a lie. The grief began to recede, replaced by something sharper, more focused. This document felt manufactured. It wasn't authored, it was assembled. It was a weapon designed to erase me. And in that moment, I stopped being a grieving dogger and started becoming a forensic analyst of my own life. For the next 3 months, I lived out of my car. I parked in different lots every night. My father's old leather briefcase, my only constant. It was the one thing I had managed to grab before the lockout. Inside were his reading glasses, a stack of old receipts, and the faint, comforting smell of his cologne. That briefcase was my anchor in a world that had been systematically dismantled. The perfection of her financial takeover was eerie. My joint bank account with my dad was frozen. The credit card he'd given me for emergencies was canceled. She moved with a chilling efficiency that confirmed this was a long-planned operation, not a reaction to loss. Meanwhile, she perfected her public performance. She was the grieving widow, draped in black, receiving condolences with a trembling voice. She gave interviews about her profound loss. But I saw the truth. This wasn't grief. This was financial warfare. She wasn't mourning a husband. She was securing an asset portfolio. The moment of absolute understanding came when I tried to withdraw $20 from an ATM and the screen flashed insufficient funds. It wasn't about the money. It was about power. It was about erasure. She wasn't just taking my inheritance, she was trying to make me disappear. And that realization ignited a cold, methodical fury. I had nothing to lose, which meant I had everything to fight for. I opened my dad's briefcase. It was time to start building my case. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in a library, using their Wi-Fi to search probate law, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. It was my father's lawyer, the one who had drafted his business contracts for 20 years. "We need to talk," he said. Not on the phone, not in my office. He named a parking garage downtown, level B2, and a time. 7 p.m. The concrete structure was damp and smelled of exhaust. I saw his Mercedes tucked into a corner, away from the security cameras. He was a man I'd known since childhood, but he looked older, strained. He didn't get out of the car. I slid into the passenger seat and the silence was heavier than the garage itself. He handed me a manila envelope, thick and sealed. "We made her prepare 2 documents," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "The one she has and this one." The weight of the envelope in my hands was immense. It felt like holding my father's last breath. The lawyer stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "She came to me after the funeral," he confessed. "Offered me triple my usual fee to lose this. Said it was just sentimental junk, that probate would be cleaner without it." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes full of a pained honesty. "Your father paid me for my integrity, not my silence. He knew. God help him, I think he knew exactly what she was capable of. His warning was simple, stark. She will destroy you if she finds out you have this. Do not open it anywhere she might see. Your safety depends on it." I clutched the envelope to my chest. This wasn't just a set of documents, it was a key. It was the blueprint to my father's true intentions, the unassailable truth he had hidden in plain sight, trusting the one person he knew would honor a promise over a bribe. The drive back to my car felt like crossing a border into a different country, one where the rules of engagement had just fundamentally changed. I drove to an all-night diner 20 miles out of town, the envelope burning a hole on the passenger seat. I chose a booth in the far back corner, my back to the wall. The vinyl seat squeaked as I slid in. The coffee in front of me grew cold, untouched. My hands shook as I broke the seal on the envelope. The first document was a prenuptial agreement. Ironclad, meticulous, page after page of precisely defined terms. It explicitly stated that the house, purchased 5 years before their marriage, remained his sole and separate property. Her signature was there, right beside his, clear and undeniable. She had lied for a decade, claiming they'd never signed anything, that their love was too pure for such cold formalities. The document was a fossil, perfectly preserved evidence of her original agreement. The financial floor dropped out from under her entire claim in that moment. Her authority, her ownership, her right to throw me out, it was all a fiction built on a lie she had willingly signed away. I set the prenup aside, my mind already racing through the legal implications. The house was never hers to claim. But there was more in the envelope. A second, shorter document. The terms of a trust. A $4.2 million allocation from his life insurance and investment portfolios. But the conditions were specific, brutal in their clarity. The funds were to be released to me, but only after my 25th birthday. And my stepmom's access to any marital assets held in trust was explicitly contingent on her maintaining, and I quote, "appropriate guardianship and shared residence with me until that time." The exquisite irony was almost too much to process. Her own actions, throwing me out, severing all ties, had voided her eligibility. Her greed had built the very trap that was about to snap shut on her. She had followed her own corrupt blueprint straight into a dead end designed by the man she thought she had outsmarted. The final page was different. The paper was softer, less formal. It was his personal stationery, and it was in his handwriting. The trust document was a masterpiece of conditional logic, a financial instrument engineered with the precision my father used in all his business dealings. It wasn't a simple gift, it was a system. The $4.2 million wasn't a pool of money waiting to be claimed, it was a series of locked doors, and my stepmom had just thrown away the only set of keys she would ever get. Her access was explicitly tied to a single, non-negotiable condition: maintaining the family unit. The language was cold and legal, but its intent was fiercely protective. It stipulated shared primary residence and guardianship consistent with the beneficiary's well-being. There was even a clause about fostering a positive and supportive familial relationship. Every word was a landmine she had already triggered. By changing the locks, by putting my belongings on the lawn, she hadn't just been cruel, she had breached the contract. She had disqualified herself from the very wealth she was so desperately trying to seize. The irony was exquisite. Her plan, which must have felt so clever and final as she turned that new key in the lock, was fundamentally flawed. She operated on the assumption that the official will was the only document that mattered. She saw the law as a blunt instrument to wield, not a complex system to navigate. My father, however, understood systems. He built his fortune by anticipating failure points, by creating backups for his backups. The trust wasn't just about providing for me. It was a trapdoor built directly under her throne. Her greed was the trigger. Her own actions provided the unassailable evidence of her breach. I didn't need to prove she was a bad person. I only needed to prove that she had violated the terms. And she had documented the violation herself, with time-stamped bank freezes and eyewitnesses who saw my trash-bagged life on the front lawn. This shifted everything. The fight was no longer about emotional pleas or moral arguments. It was a contractual dispute. I was no longer the grieving daughter begging for fairness. I was the beneficiary of a trust, enforcing its terms against a party in breach. The clarity was absolute. The battle would be fought on a field of documented conditions and verifiable actions, a field where her emotional manipulation would be irrelevant. My father hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me a blueprint for vindication. The money was almost secondary. The real inheritance was this moment of crystalline understanding, the strategic high ground he had secured for me from beyond the grave. The system, as he designed it, was already working. All I had to do was follow the protocol. Beneath the crisp typed pages of the trust agreement, the paper changed. It was the heavy, cream-colored stationery from his desk, the kind he used for personal letters. And it was in his handwriting. That familiar looping script, a little messy, always leaning slightly to the right as if rushing to keep up with his thoughts. The date at the top was 2 weeks before his death. A holographic will, entirely handwritten, dated, and signed. In the eyes of the law in our state, that carried the same weight as a document signed before a team of notaries. More, perhaps, because its authenticity was in the uniqueness of his own hand. He started with specific bequests, each one a piece of our life together. His platinum watch, the one he wore every day for 20 years, was left to me. His entire library of history books, with a note in the margin, so you never forget where we came from. And the house was mine. He wrote the address, our address, and the words free and clear of any other claim. He was dismantling her entire case with a pen from his deathbed. But the final paragraph, that undid me. The legal language fell away, and it was just my dad speaking to me one last time. If you're reading this, then she has shown her true colors. I am so sorry you have to face this. I suspected the financial ambition, but I prayed for your sake I was wrong. Do not mourn me for long. Do not waste your spirit on anger, though God knows you have the right to it. Use it, channel it, protect what we built. The house is your foundation. The trust is your shield. You are smarter and stronger than she will ever understand. The truth is your weapon. Wield it. I am so proud of the person you are. Build a life of integrity, not just wealth. That is my final wish for you. All my love, always. I sat in that diner booth, the paper trembling in my hands. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation faded into nothing. This wasn't a legal document anymore. It was a conversation. It was an apology and a battle plan all in one. He knew. He had seen the future she was planning, and from his hospital bed, he had quietly, methodically built the fortress that would protect me from it. The grief I had been holding back hit me then, but it was a different kind. It was clean. It was purifying. It wasn't the desperate sadness of loss. It was the fierce, proud sorrow of a love that planned for you beyond the grave. He hadn't been defeated by her. He had outmaneuvered her. My father, the strategist, had played the final, most important move of his life, and he had entrusted me with the victory. The feeling of betrayal didn't vanish, but it was now framed by something larger, a mission. My emotional chaos crystallized into a single, cold point of focus.
I had the prenup. I had the trust. I had his handwritten will. I had the unassailable truth. The preparation was over. The reckoning could begin. The next 48 hours were a blur of methodical action. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind the ice-cold clarity of a surgical procedure. I was no longer a victim reacting to her moves. I was an architect building a case with unassailable evidence. I started with documentation. I took time-stamped photographs of my belongings still sitting in those black trash bags on her lawn, the new luck gleaming on the front door. I printed bank statements showing the exact date my accounts were frozen. I requested copies of the original mortgage documents from the county recorder's office, the papers that proved my father purchased the house a full 5 years before their marriage. Each document was a brick in the wall I was constructing around her false narrative. Then I went hunting for witnesses. I found the notary public whose seal was on the prenuptial agreement. She was a retired paralegal working out of a small office above a post office. She remembered them. He was so serious, she told me, looking at the document. She was impatient, kept checking her watch. He made her read every line. The notary's testimony would be devastating. I tracked down the bank manager who had processed the account freeze. He was uncomfortable, but he confirmed the request came from her, accompanied by a copy of the fraudulent will. Every person I spoke to, every document I collected, was another thread pulled from the tapestry of her lie. I organized it all in my father's briefcase, a chronological, bulletproof ledger of her deceit. The shift was complete. I was no longer fighting for my inheritance. I was executing a preordained plan, following the blueprint my father had left. I was auditing her betrayal, and the balance sheet was about to be settled. The evidence was no longer just paper, it was a poised weapon waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment arrived with a formal letter from the probate court setting the date for the official will reading. It was time to present my findings. The lawyer's office was a temple of wood paneling and suppressed anxiety. She was already there, perched on the edge of a leather chair, the picture of grieving dignity in a black sheath dress. She offered me a look of pained sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. Her lawyer sat beside her, a man with a sharp suit and a sharper smile. My father's old lawyer, the one from the garage, was there too, his face a careful mask of neutrality. The air was thick with the silence before a verdict. The sharp-suited lawyer began to read the fraudulent will, his voice a smooth, confident drone. He emphasized the clauses, leaving her everything, glossing over the pittance left to me. She dabbed at a non-existent tear with a tissue. Then the lawyer finished. There was a pause. The sharp-suited man looked at me, expectant, ready to usher me out. That's when I spoke. My voice was calm, flat. It didn't sound like my own. There seems to be a discrepancy in the documentation. I reached into my father's briefcase and placed the manila envelope on the polished table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Her head snapped toward me. I slid out the prenuptial agreement first. I watched the blood drain from her face as her own signature stared back at her from 15 years ago. Her lawyer picked it up, his confidence faltering as he scanned the terms. This changes the characterization of the marital residence, he stammered.
But I wasn't done. I placed the trust document next. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the clause concerning appropriate guardianship. Then I laid the time-stamped photo of the trash bags on the lawn directly on top of it. The silence that followed was absolute. Her performance had shattered. The widow's veil was gone, replaced by raw, panicked fury. Finally, I placed the last page on the table. His handwritten will. My father's lawyer, his voice now thick with emotion, picked it up. As the drafting attorney, I can authenticate this holographic instrument, he said. He began to read my father's words aloud. My house I leave to my daughter, free and clear. Do not waste your spirit on anger. Protect what we built. As his voice filled the room with my father's final wishes, she broke. She lunged forward, a guttural sound escaping her throat. That's not legal. It's a forgery. He was on medication. He didn't know what he was writing.
Her own lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but she shook him off, her eyes wild, fixed on me. "You did this! You manipulative little—" The mask was not just off. It was obliterated. The calculated widow was gone, replaced by a cornered animal, all her lies and schemes laid bare in front of the very people she had tried to manipulate. Her verbal explosion wasn't a defense. It was a confession. It was the sound of a house of cards collapsing in on itself, and she was trapped in the rubble. The performance was over. The reckoning had begun, and she was watching her entire future dissolve in the span of 60 seconds, destroyed by the quiet truth of a father's love and his meticulous final plan. Her explosion in the lawyer's office was the final piece of evidence I needed. It wasn't just an emotional outburst. It was an admission against interest. Her claims of forgery and incompetence collapsed under the weight of her own documented actions. The legal consequences were immediate and systematic. The probate court froze all estate assets pending a full audit. The house, now clearly established as my father's separate property through the prenuptial agreement, was immediately removed from her control. The locks were changed again, this time by a court-appointed official, and the keys were handed to me. Her name was stripped from the bank accounts she had so swiftly commandeered. The $4.2 million trust was placed under the management of an independent executor, its terms irrevocably enforcing her disqualification. There were no dramatic courtroom showdowns, no tearful appeals. The case was settled through a series of dry procedural motions. Her lawyer, seeing the unassailable wall of evidence, the authenticated prenup, the breached trust conditions, and the holographic will, advised her to settle. There was no defense. My father's blueprint was too perfect. He had anticipated her every move and built the legal equivalent of a maze where every exit led back to her own guilt. The cold, methodical unraveling of her scheme was almost anticlimactic. The law, when presented with such clear and documented truth, operated like a machine. It was a forensic process, not a dramatic one. The house of cards she built didn't just fall. It was disassembled, piece by piece, each false claim neatly invalidated by a corresponding piece of paper my father had left behind. Her power, which had felt so absolute when she stood behind that new lock, evaporated into the sterile air of the probate court. She was left with only what the original prenuptial agreement allowed her. A modest lump sum, a severance package for a marriage that had, in its final act, been exposed as a transactional facade. Moving back into the house was a quiet, surreal experience. It was the same structure, the same floor as my father had walked on, but the energy was different. The ghost of her presence was there in the impersonal decor she had favored, the cold modern pieces that had replaced our worn, comfortable furniture. The first thing I did was take the new lock she had installed and throw it in the trash. Then I opened every window, letting the stale air out and the light in. I wasn't celebrating, there was no victory party. The satisfaction was deeper, quieter. It was the satisfaction of restored order, of a system functioning as it was designed to do. The financial security was immense, a fact that settled in my bones not as excitement, but as a profound relief. The fear of instability that had haunted me for months was gone, replaced by the solid foundation my father had intended. She disappeared from our lives completely. There was no final confrontation, no apology. She moved to another state, a fact I learned from a mutual acquaintance. The silence she left behind was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. The house became mine again, not just in legal title, but in spirit. I slowly reclaimed it, putting our old photos back on the walls, refilling the bookshelves with his history books. The peace came from knowing the truth had eventually balanced the scales. The emotional chaos had been processed through the rigid filter of evidence and law, and what remained was clarity. I had my home, I had my future, and I had the final, handwritten message from my father, A permanent reminder that integrity is a legacy more valuable than any dollar amount. The ordeal hadn't made me bitter. It had made me certain. Certain about the kind of person I never wanted to be, and certain about the values I would protect.